In this video demonstration, we'll look at split toning effects in Lightroom, particularly sepia. Here I've done a Google image search for antique sepia photo, ensuring that these are genuine sepia photos rather than simulated sepia photos. Traditionally, this warm yellow brownish tone to the images was achieved by use of cuttlefish pigment, essentially squid ink and of the sort, in the development process in the darkroom. To adjust your image to a sepia effect in Lightroom, you'll first need to make black and white adjustments to your image. So here, I have already adjusted this particular image to black and white. Before creating the split toned effect, I'm going to right-click or control-click on a Mac laptop on the image and create a virtual copy. So this way I have a color copy, a black and white copy, and a copy that is going to be sepia. One of the things I really love about virtual copies in Lightroom is that I can have all of these copies of a single photo with special effects, and they all go back to the original raw image file. In other words, the adjustments are stored in Lightroom as very minimal file size and space, whereas if I wanted to do similar effects in layered adjustments in Photoshop, for example, they would create enormous files. So I'm going to head over to the Develop module. Since I've created a virtual copy, it's showing the black and white version as the before and the same as the after. I have not yet made any adjustments, but just to let you know, Lightroom does actually remember the original colors in the image. If I adjust the sliders, for example, they go ahead and adjust. I can still use something like the target adjustment tool to go ahead and make adjustments as well. I'm just going to go back to the virtual copy state. Okay. So if you have not worked with split toning before, it is below the HSL color black and white panel in Lightroom, split toning. You have option to choose the hue and saturation level of highlights and of shadows. Okay. There's also a balance slider, and I'll show you how that works in the next image demonstration. For a sepia effect, generally you'll want to choose warm colors like red, orange, yellow in both the highlight and shadow areas. You can do so on the hue slider, or you can just click on the color picker next to highlights and choose essentially the hue or color, and this is the saturation slider. Generally you want it to be pretty subtle. I'm going to probably end up taking that down a bit. Now I'm going to choose my shadows. I'm going to choose essentially a very similar color to the highlights. I'm going to go ahead and leave that almost extremely saturated right now. That's not looking very genuinely sepia at this point. But if I take the saturation and of the highlights and shadows down significantly, it's beginning to look a lot more genuinely sepia. I could also go ahead and adjust the hue slider. Perhaps I want it a bit more toward yellow than the red. And now I'm getting those rich brown tones that we typically associate with a sepia type adjustment. One other thing you might want to add in a photo like this is a slight vignette. In Effects, Post-Cropping Vignette, taking the level down very drastically will add a drastic vignette. I suggest a very subtle vignette would be right in line with the look of a sepia photo. Okay. While you're just experimenting, learning, and getting used to this process, I encourage you to look through the Lightroom presets. If you hover over these presets, it will show you in the navigator what they will look like. Okay. Those are black and white filter presets, Lightroom black and white presets, high contrast, so-and-so, toned presets. That's where you're most likely to have a sepia. Antique is somewhat of a sepia. If you wanted to go ahead and click on that to see which adjustments were made in the split toning area panel in Lightroom and the basic and possibly tone curves area, you're welcome to do so. I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. Now it's that antique preset in Lightroom. It shows exactly what the highlight hue levels, saturation, number identification, and so forth are. I personally do not particularly enjoy that adjustment, so I'm just going to go back to where I was. But I'm going to continue to scroll over the sepia tone preset, and Lightroom is actually very similar to the one I've done, just not quite as much contrast. But again, you can look at the hue numbers. You can also type those numbers in here if you associate the colors with numbers and so forth. I'm going to go back again to my adjustment. Let's see. So sepia, there's a split tone. Cyanotype is another type of monochrome split tone traditional image. I don't think that Lightroom does a very good job at cyanotype. They tend to be a much more vibrant blue or cyan tone. The cream, antique light, split tone 1, 2, there's a green, a yellow, kind of a nice brown tone. There are also color presets, aged photo, kind of a nice effect. Again, if you look to these presets for ideas or specific settings that you might successfully use to create a similar effect to the one you want, what I suggest is clicking on the preset, simply looking at the settings, and basically undoing and trying to replicate them yourself. Okay. For my next image, I am going to go ahead and create a non-sepia split tone effect on this image. I'm going to go ahead and choose yellow for the highlights and a purple, kind of a blue purple for the shadows. Okay, and here I'm going to put the saturation up significantly just to show you how the balance works. The balance by default is at 0, but if you take the balance to the left, it favors the shadow color choice. So it's essentially turning all of the image the purple choice in the shadows. Here it's about 75% concentrated on the shadows, only 25% on the highlights. And likewise, if I take it to the right, there's only a small amount of purple or the shadow choice left in the image and so forth. So I'm just going to leave it at 0 by double clicking on it. Now I'm going to take the saturation down to a level I'm happier with. The yellow I think can afford to stay quite high. The purple I want to make much more subtle. As far as a particular number here, it really depends on the hue and image you're working with, but I really recommend keeping it subtle. Okay, so here there's just a slight purple hue. It's very similar to a selenium effect, another traditional darkroom process that tends to have either very subtle but deep purple, blue, or brown tones. And by the way, it is possible to add a split toned effect to a full color image. I'll go ahead and show that here. So here's a color image. It hasn't been adjusted to black and white in any manner. I'll go ahead and put blues in the highlights, and let's say red in the shadows. So definitely those effects can be added to color images as well, but for this exercise, the split toning of your choice, I do prefer it's more of a monochrome or duotone image rather than applied to full color.